Welcome back to my channel. I am your host, G.I. Wingnut. We are continuing with looking into Atlantis and Lemuria by Rudolph Steiner, originally published in 1911. So, let's go ahead and get on into Chapter 8. Chapter 8, Man's First Ancestors. The observations of the Akashic Record, which will be described in the following pages, date from a period immediately preceding the incidents related to a previous chapter. In view of the materialistic tendencies of thought at the present day, the risk attending the publication of the following facts is even greater than that incurred by the descriptions given in the preceding chapters. Ooh, dangerous information. All right. Continuing. One is so liable in these days when dealing with matters of this kind to be dubbed fantastic or accused of groundless speculation, that nothing but the conviction that the information we offer with regard to spiritual evidence is true and accurate could induce us to publish these statements, knowing, as we do only too well, that anyone who is versed in the teachings of physical science, as accepted by the present generation, will be unable to even approach the matter in a serious attitude of mind. Nothing is herein stated but what has been carefully tested according to the methods employed by spiritual science. And all we ask of the ordinary scientist is that he shall accord to the student of the higher science the same tolerance as the latter shows to the mode of thought of physical science. See my Welt und not even trying that. Where I think I have shown my appreciation for the views by materialistic science. Nevertheless, for the benefit of many who may be sympathetically inclined towards the teachings of the higher science, I would add a further special remark with reference to the present expositions. We shall here touch upon matters of very great significance, pertaining to an age now long past, matters which, portrayed by the records of Akasha, it is by no means an easy task to decipher. You have to understand the decoding. You have to have the secret knowledge, says every cult that ever existed. Moving along. The writer indeed makes no claim on blind faith. He merely sets forth the results of investigations on which the utmost care has been bestowed, and any correction, if based on a practical knowledge of such matters, would be welcomed. The signs of the times are such as to impress him with a sense of duty, nay, urgency, in making known these events in the evolution of mankind. Oh my goodness, I'm having flashbacks to Robin Bullock again. Continuing. Moreover, we shall first have to sketch briefly an extensive period of existence in order to gain at the outset a good general idea. Many things, therefore, which are now merely indicated, will receive a more detailed exposition in later chapters. It is, however, difficult to translate the inscriptions of the Akashic records into everyday language. It is easier to decipher the occult language of symbolical signs used in occult schools, but this is not yet permitted in our time. Okay. Definition of occult simply means hidden. So occult language of symbolical signs or symbolism. the hidden language of symbols. Getting back to this wacky story, the reader is therefore begged to give a hearing to much that may seem obscure and hard to understand, to make a valiant endeavor to grasp their meaning, as the author, or on his part, has striven to devise a mode of interpretation capable of being understood by all. Huh, that reminds me of a certain uh, quote unquote pastor that embraces the message of the 13th letter people, or I'm sorry, 17th letter people, Q. This guy embraces Q, and he leans into authorial intent with the whole explanation that the words I use mean what I say they mean. So you have no idea of understanding what I meant when I said what I meant, which is actually rooted in his understanding of Scientology, as I sussed out from our conversation. So, moving right along. The trouble extended in mastering many a difficult passage will be rewarded by the insight gained into the profound mysteries, the mysterious problems of humanity herein revealed. Yep, work your way up the bridge of freedom. Get your OT levels in Scientology by accepting our brainwashing, by letting go of reality, that which we can sense for ourselves and prove for ourselves. Anyway, holy mackerel, moving along. These Akashic records, which for the occult investigator are as much an undeniable reality as mountains and rivers are for the physical eye, constitute for man the basis of a true knowledge of self. An error of perception is, of course, as possible for the one as for the other. So not all is as it seems, whether it's this imaginary record or your very own sight. All right. Continuing. It must be remembered that the present chapter relates only to the evolution of man as a matter of course. The other kingdoms of nature, the mineral, the plant, and the animal, are evolving side by side with humanity, and these other evolutions will be dealt with in future chapters. In these we shall discuss certain other subjects that are destined to illumine and to render more comprehensible the details given concerning man's evolution. On the other hand, we shall not be able to study the evolution of the other terrestrial kingdoms from the occult standpoint until the gradual development of man has been shown. You got to understand this to understand that. It's all connected, blah, blah. Continuing, when we retrace still further the Earth's evolutionary history, further back even than we have done in the foregoing pages, we find our celestial globe composed of other finer conditions of matter. Hold up. Even this guy says that we live on a globe. I mean, even a broken clock is right, at least twice a day, unless the hands fell off, or it's a digital clock. Anyway, back to it. The matter which later became solid was, at a previous stage, liquid. Before that, gaseous and of the nature of vapor. While at a still remoter point, we find it in its finest form, that is to say, as ether. The decrease of temperature, however, caused the gradual solidification of matter. In our present studies, we go back to the time when our earthly dwelling place was composed of matter in its finest etheric state. In that epoch of Earth's evolution, man began his earthly career. In earlier times, he had lived in other worlds, which will be the subject of study elsewhere. See An Outline of Occult Science by Rudolph Steiner, PhD. We will here only say a word or two about the existence which immediately preceded his earth life. It was what we should call an astral or spiritual world, peopled with beings who had no outer, that is to say, no physical, corporeal existence. Neither had man. He had by that time perfected the picture consciousness or dream consciousness, which was described in a foregoing chapter. He possessed feelings and desires, but all confined in a soul body. A human being in that stage would only have been visible to clairvoyant sight. Oh, like being able to see demons and such, or thetans, or whatnot. Okay, getting back to it. It is true that the mere highly evolved human beings of that period possessed such sight, though it was a rather vague and dreamy description. It was not self-conscious clairvoyance. These astral beings are, in a certain sense, man's ancestors. For what today we call man contains from an indwelling self-conscious spirit. This spirit became united to the being which descended from that ancestor about the middle of the Lemurian phase of civilization. This union of the soul ancestor with the physical ancestor has already been mentioned in earlier chapters. The subject will be taken up again and treated more explicitly after we have followed the evolution of man's ancestors up to that point. All in due time. All in due time. Patience, patience. Oh my goodness. Continuing. The astral or soul ancestors of man were transplanted to the subtle matter of the etheric world. They absorbed this subtle matter into themselves, roughly putting it, sometime or something after the manner of a sponge. Thus, by permeating themselves with etheric matter, their etheric bodies were formed. Good grief, this is sounding a lot like Mormonism. Moving on. They were elongated and elliptic in form, yet subtle differentiations of matter, tendencies to form limbs and other organs to be developed at a later period, were even then perceptible. The whole process, perceptible in the mass of etheric matter, was, however, purely physiochemical, though regulated and controlled by the soul. Oh, amoebas with souls. Interesting. Moving on. When one of these ovoids of matter has reached a certain size, it split into two, forming two new masses, each resembling the one which gave it birth, and reproducing the same activities which were at work in the parent form. Mitosis, is that cellular mitosis? Is that what that's called? Continuing. Every one of these new forms processed a soul similar to that of the mother being. The reason of this was not only a definite number of human souls incarnated on the physical plane, but there was what might be called a soul tree or group soul, which was able, as it were, to give off innumerable individual souls sprung from its common root. Why am I thinking of that movie? Oh, good grief. What was that movie? What I was thinking of, the Soul Tree from Avatar. Anyway, Just as a plant springs up again and again from numberless seeds, so did the soul life reincarnate in the countless offshoots which were created as a result of these continual cleavings. Of course, there existed from the beginning a very limited number of soul species, but within these species, evolution proceeded in the manner described, each soul species putting forth innumerable scions. With the incarnation in physical matter, a most important change came over the souls themselves. As long as the souls remained unconnected with the material world, no outward material occurrence could affect them. All influences affecting them were purely psychic or clairvoyant. Thus, in their life, they shared the astral influences of their surroundings, and it was in this way that they took part in or experienced everything that existed at that time. Sounds like a brave new world to me. If you haven't read that book or seen the movie, I suggest it. Moving along. The impressions made by stones, plants, and animals, then also existing in a pure astral or soul form, were felt as inner experiences of the soul. So, stones, plants, and animals have souls? Okay, moving on. On entering the plane of our earth, something quite new was added. Outer material events brought influences to bear upon the soul, which had thus robed itself in a or robed itself in a garment of etheric matter. At first, these influences consisted of motions in the outer material world, which caused responding activity in the etheric body. In the same way as the vibrations of the air now affect us in the form of sound, so were those etheric beings affected by the vibrations of the etheric matter surrounding them. Such a being was, in fact, a single organ of hearing. This sense was the first to be developed, but from this we see that the separated organ of hearing was formed at a later period. Gives a whole new meaning to I'm all ears. Continuing. With the increasing solidification of physical matter, the soul nature gradually lost control over its formation. The bodies already formed could only reproduce bodies after their own image. A change now occurs in the manner of generation, that is to say, the offspring of the mother being appears considerably smaller, only growing gradually to the size of the parent. Organs of generation now began to appear, whereas hitherto they had not existed. Henceforth, it is no mere physico-chemical process which takes place within the form. Such a process is now no longer sufficient for the purpose of generation, for the outer matter, growing denser and denser, is no longer capable of being directly influenced by the soul. A special portion within the form is therefore set apart for this function, being withdrawn from the immediate influence from the outside material world. Only the body, exclusive of the specialized part, is still exposed to these influences, and it remains in the condition which was formerly that of the whole body. In the specialized part of the psychic nature continues to work, and the soul becomes, at this point, the vehicle of the life principle, called in theosophical literature prana. What the heck did I just read? So, yeah, Apparently, that's how we get male and female in physical form as recognized today. Okay, moving on. We now find the physical human ancestor in possession of two principles. One being the physical body, which is subject to the chemical and physical laws of the world surrounding it, and the second, the sum total of the organs directly controlled by the individual life principle. In this manner, a part of the activity of the soul has been liberated, no longer retaining power over the physical sheath. The soul turns this part of its activity inwards, performing part of the body, transforming part of the body into special organs, and so begins an inner life of the body. It no longer merely participates in the vibration from without, but begins to feel them inwardly as individual experiences. So that reminds me of an acid trip at a music festival where I could feel all the different musical instruments inside my body, but with different organs. So like I could feel the drums with my heart. I could feel the keyboards with my lungs. Yeah, it was a weird experience, but it was a chemical alteration. Um, just wild. Continuing in this manner, a part of the activity of the soul has been liberated, no longer retaining power over the physical sheath. The soul turns this part of its activities inwards, transformer. Okay, so I read all that. So yeah, that means that we created ourselves. That there wasn't a great creator. That somehow our etheric knowledge knew that we needed to develop kidneys and bladders and all that. Oh boy. Continuing, it no longer merely participates in the. Okay, here sensation begins. At first, the sensation somewhat resembles the sense of touch. The subject feels the movements of the outer world, the pressure caused by substances, and so on. Also, a sensation of heat and cold began to now be developed. At this point, man has reached an important stage in his evolution. The direct influence of the soul has been withdrawn from the physical body, the latter being entirely surrounded by or surrendered to the physical and chemical activities of the material world. The moment the soul, at work in the other principles, relaxes its hold over the body, the latter dissolves. Hold on loosely or you'll lose control. Continuing. The moment this, hang on, this is the beginning of what we call death. We cannot speak of death in reference to previous states. In the simple case of separation, the life of the mother form is continued in the offspring, for in the latter are at work all the transformed soul forces which hitherto had sought expression in one in the one parent form. After the separation, nothing remains that is soulless. So that which is born begins to die. That's all you needed to say, really. I mean, but they got to use these big words and draw it out and make it all flowery and verbose to make it seem intellectual and philosophical. Back to this. A change now takes place. As soon as the soul ceases to retain its power over the physical body, the latter is subject to the chemical and physical laws of the outer world. That is to say, it decays. The field of activity for the soul power is limited to generation and developed inner life. For through this generative power, descendants are brought forth, which are in their own endowed with a surplus of organ forming power. In this surplus, the soul always returns to life again, as the whole body was formerly filled with the psychic activity at the separation. So were now the organs of reproduction and of sensation. So, reincarnation. Thetans dropping old bodies and picking up new ones to continue their work clearing the planet. So much nonsense. Let's try to finish this up. We must recognize in this nothing less than a rebirth of the soul life in a new growing organism. Theosophical literature describes these two evolutionary stages of man as the first root race of our earth. The first is called the polar race, the second, the Hyperborean race. We must bear in mind that the field of sensation possessed by these human forefathers was of a general character and as yet quite vague and indefinite. So far, only two of the kinds of sensation we now possess were differentiated, the sense of hearing and that of touch. By reason of the changes, however, which the body was undergoing, as well as its physical environment, the whole human form was no longer capable of acting, so to speak, as all ear. Henceforth, a specialized part of the body retained the power of responding to delicate vibrations and supplied the material form to which was gradually developed the organ of hearing we now possess, whilst the rest of the body remained almost entirely an organ of touch. Back to this wacky tome. Obviously, the whole process of the evolution of man has hitherto been connected with the alteration in the degree of warmth of our earth. It was, in fact, due to the heat in his surroundings that man evolved to the stage we have just described. The heat from without, however, had now reached a point at which further progress in the formation of the human body was no longer possible. Thus, with the cooling off of Earth, a corresponding reaction set within the form itself, and man became the generator of his own supply of heat, whereas hitherto his temperature had been that of his surroundings. Oh, so that's when mankind became mammal? Okay, continuing. Organs now appear in him, enabling him to generate for himself the degree of heat for his life. Up to now, currents of substances had circulated within him, dependent on the environment for the necessary heat. But now he could generate his own heat, for these substances and fluids of the body turned into warm blood. Thus, he had attained a far greater degree of self-dependence as a physical being than ever before, and his whole inner life was intensified. Sensations still dependent upon the effects of the outer world. The filling of the body with its own warmth gave it an independent physical inner life. The soul had now a field of activity within the body where it could unfold an existence which no longer be a mere sharing in the life of the outer world. By this proceeding, the astral or soul life was drawn into the sphere of physical matter. Hitherto desires, longings, and passions, joy and sorrows of soul could only arise from the psychic influences, and attraction and aversion were awakened, passions excited, and so on. By this proceeded from one soul to another. So the birth of hedonism and the desire for big brain intellectual attraction. Yeah, okay, interesting. I don't think that's how it was, but back to it. No other external physical object could have preceded such effects. Now, for the first time, the possibility arose that such outer objects had a significance for the soul, for the quickening of the inner life, which followed the inner power, or followed the power of the generating its own heat, caused it to experience the sensation of pleasure, while the disturbance of this inner life caused it discomfort. An outer object qualified to maintain bodily comfort could become an object of desire or longing. The astral or desire body, known as kama in theosophical literature, was united with terrestrial man, and the objects of the senses became objects capable of being desired. Man was thus bound through his desire bodily to the earthly existence. The foregoing fact coincides with a great cosmic event with which it is causally connected. Till now, there had been no material separation between sun, earth, and moon. These three affected man as a single body. At this point, separation occurs, the finer moment, including all that which had hitherto conferred on the soul the power of directly giving life, was separated off as sun. The grossest matter went forth as the moon, while the earth, with its materiality, occupied a position between the two. Of course, the separation did not occur suddenly, for the whole process was gradually taking place while man was advancing from the stage of generation by cleavage to that just described. So they're not promoting a Big Bang thing. So even from this point of view, even the universe and all things in it evolved as man evolved. Interesting theory. Continuing, the advance in man's evolution was indeed accomplished just through the cosmic happenings mentioned. First, the sun withdrew its substance from the common globe. The soul was therefore deprived of the possibility of directly vivifying the earth substance left behind. Then the moon began to take form, in this way bringing about a condition of the earth favorable to the growth of the capacity for sensation, just as we have already described. In conjunction with this occurrence, a new sensation or a new sense was developed. The conditions of warmth of the earth became such that bodies gradually took on definite outline, dividing the transparent matter from the opaque. The sun, which had withdrawn from the earth body, now assumed its task as light giver. Remember, they described light giver earlier in this document as Lucifer. So they're saying the sun became Lucifer, essentially. Continuing, and awoke in the human body the sense of sight. It was not at first what we know as sight today. Light and darkness were perceptible to man as vague sensations. For instance, he was aware that under certain conditions, light gave him a sense of comfort and well-being, quickening the life in his body. Therefore, he sought it and strove towards it. Meanwhile, the actual soul life continued to run its course in the form of dreamlike pictures. Color pictures came and went in this life without having any particular connection with the things of the outer world. and these color pictures were still attributed by man to soul activities. Light color pictures appeared to him when his astral experiences were pleasant, somber pictures when he was affected by disagreeable astral influences. Hey, this sounds like the light and dark souls teaching from that book, Visions of Glory, that was used by folks like Ruby Frank and Chad Daybell and Lori Daybell and that whole gaggle of individuals over there. I'm not going to, anyway. Moving along. That which was affected as a result of self generated heat, we had called in the foregoing the inner life. Nevertheless, we see that it was not an inner life or an inner life in the sense that of later human development. All things advanced step by step, and so does evolution of the inner life. In the sense that which it has been spoken of in a former chapter, this true inner life only begins when the fructification by the mind takes place. When man begins to think about these outer influences, all that has been described here does but show how man climbed upward to the state depicted in the preceding chapter. And we really live over again the times there described when we picture ourselves the following. More and more the soul learns to relate to the outer body experience, that which is formerly lived through itself and which is only attributed to soul influences. Pardon me. So Buddhist reincarnation, which is also taught in Scientology. Interesting. Yeah, let's go ahead and get this wrapped up. The same thing now happened with regard to the color pictures. Just as before, the impression of the sympathetic psychic influence was connected in the individual soul with the bright color picture. So did it now become a bright light impression from outside. The soul began to perceive in colors the objects surrounding it. This was in conjunction with the development of the new organs of sight, the eyes. And at its previous stages, the body had one eye. I'm guessing they're talking about the third eye, which does not exist today, by means of which it vaguely sensed the light and the darkness. The legend of the Cyclops with one eye is a reminiscence of this state. Or your, maybe, yeah, that goes back to your third eye, or as some call it, the pineal gland. Final paragraph in this chapter, and we only got 2 more chapters to get through. Continuing. The 2 eyes developed when the soul began to associate the external light impressions more intimately with its own life, and thus was lost, or the capacity to, and thus was lost the capacity of perception of the surrounding astral world. The soul became more and more a mirror of the outer world, the latter being reproduced within it as an image. And simultaneously with this, the separation of the sexes appeared. On the one hand, the human body became capable of fecundation only by another human being, while on the other hand, there developed in the body soul organs, the nervous system, by which the sense impressions of the outer world were reflected in the soul, thereby preparing the way for the mind, or thinking principle, of the human body. Man, this stuff's wild. Kudos to the troopers who are making it all the way through all these videos, because you're the ones that want this information. I appreciate those who are hungry for knowledge. Remember, Genuine mental health matters. Consider your sources. Always double check everything and be open minded enough to accept things that may contradict what you believe, unless you do have the facts that contradict the information that's being proven, allegedly. So, with that said, hope to catch you in the next video. Take care of yourselves.
Everybody wants to